It is entirely possible that I dropped this bike. Wasn't me.
So, now that we've established that Rafiki here is staying for now, but maybe sold in the future, I wanted to take a moment to capture my thoughts on this bike, because I know that once I start riding Laren, as I said last week, my thoughts on this bike, my feelings, my love for this bike may change, and I'm well aware of that. And so before that potentially happens, I just wanted to capture my thoughts on this bike. This is not going to be a review or a buyer's guide or anything like that. This is just an opportunity for me to record my thoughts about this bike as they are at this moment. Now, I've been riding with Rafiki here for a total of about 3.5 years. I did buy him in 2018, but on account of lockdown there was a period of time there where I didn't ride. So I've been riding this bike for a total of 3.5 years, and I can't imagine having had a different 125. I can't imagine a better 125 out there, a better bike to learn on. It really has been thoroughly enjoyable learning to ride with this bike, and I know that you could say that about any bike. But just whilst I'm sharing my thoughts, that's how I feel about this bike. I feel like I definitely chose the correct bike, and learning on what is essentially an underpowered sports bike, it has been absolutely amazing, and I've learned pretty much everything on this bike. I learned my slow bike control. I almost immediately, when I very first started riding this bike, I learnt about target fixation. I learnt the hard way. No accidents or injuries, but I did drift. I drifted quite wide on a bend on my first time out. But as I say, I really can't imagine having learnt on anything else. This bike has been amazing for learning to ride. And I once watched a YouTuber who had one of these, and I must have watched him before I bought Rafiki. He had a YZF R125 first gen, and he lent his bike to a friend, and they both went out, and unfortunately the friend, well, he crashed the bike. I don't mean, you know, crashed into something else, no. Something had happened off camera because he was behind our YouTuber, and he'd come off the bike. He'd low-sided, he'd slipped out, something had happened, and he'd come off the bike, put a load of scratches on it, etc. And the YouTuber in question, he took it really, really well. You know, I have to give him credit there. He did take it really well, and he was saying to his mate, "Look, mate, don't worry about it." And he said, "It's a 125." He says, "It's a 125, mate. They're made for crashing." Now, it was really nice the way he didn't make a big thing of it, you know, the way he had put his friend at ease and said, "Mate, don't worry about it." That was really nice of him. But I have to say, I don't agree with his statement that these bikes are made for crashing. I don't believe that at all. I don't believe that they are out and out made for crashing. Yes, we learn on these bikes. But they're not made for crashing. You may crash them, you may slip out, you may low side. You know, as you're learning, as we all do, you'll make mistakes. Oh, I remember trying to do a left-hand U-turn whilst going up a really steep hill in Brixham, and I got about halfway around and the bike stalled because I wasn't giving him enough revs. He was in the wrong gear, and I stalled. So I'm learning, you know, I was learning on the bike. It was brilliant. And then the next time I got to that bend, I thought, right then, I know how to do this now. So I took it a bit wider, took it in a lower gear. I got about halfway round and I stalled. And again, I learnt from that, and you know, it was one of those things that I had to kind of laugh off a little bit. And then third time round, it's like, right then, I know what I'm doing now. I took it as wide as I possibly could. I was down into first gear, I was barely moving, and we made it. And I hadn't realised at the time that that was going to be a learning opportunity 3 times around. But I learnt that on this bike. And yeah, when this YouTuber says, they're made for crashing, I don't agree with that. I don't agree that even a 125 is made for crashing. They are made for learning. Yes, you may come off them, but they're made for learning, not crashing, in my opinion anyway. Now, as much as I don't agree with the statement that these bikes are made for crashing, they do inevitably get dropped, and Rafiki is no exception. His previous owner, or one of them, multiple previous owners, I don't know, he's been down. He's been down on both sides. He has various scratches here that are very superficial, and he has the main one there. And he has similar on the other side, unfortunately. Exactly the same place. Well, more or less the same place. There it is, right there. There we go. So yeah, very similar place, as well as a little bit just here on the nose. And how do I feel about that? What's my thoughts on that? Well, these are his battle scars. These are his battle scars that he wears with pride. Now, it is entirely possible that people think that I did this. People may think that I dropped this bike. Frankly, I don't care what people think. This is a 125. It is entirely possible that I dropped this bike. Wasn't me, was a previous owner. But these battle scars don't really bother me. I don't ride around on my bike thinking to myself, oh no, this bike's got scratches on the sides. What are people going to think? Shit happens. You may drop your bike, especially when you're on a 125 and you're learning, and you might get some battle scars. Let your bike wear his or her battle scars with pride. I did clean this bike a couple of weeks back. After I made my video talking about the cost of winter riding, I did clean the bike. You wouldn't think it now though, because, well, the roads have been very wet, and yeah, it's looking like I didn't clean him. But I did clean him. I can't wait for the spring and for the summer where I'm not cleaning my bike after almost every ride. Anyway, back to my thoughts on this bike. Let me just turn my attention to the exhaust for a minute. These bikes are relatively quiet bikes, and that works for me. I know a lot of bikers like a loud bike, but I'm a little different in that respect. These bikes are relatively quiet. I did
fit an aftermarket exhaust, and there's plenty available if that's your thing. If you want to fit an aftermarket exhaust, there's plenty available, but it wasn't for me. I like a quieter bike. Now, I said earlier that I learnt my slow bike control on this bike, and I did. But one thing caught me by surprise. When I'm doing very slow, very tight manoeuvres, have a look at this. When I'm taking very slow, very tight manoeuvres, my arm hits my knee, and that caught me by surprise. But then again, I am 6'2", and a lot of my height is in my legs. But this is a particularly tall bike. It's quite a substantial sized bike. But I wasn't expecting, even with all of my height in my legs, I was not expecting my arm to hit my knee on full lock, or just before I get to full lock. So what I end up doing on these very slow, very tight manoeuvres is I end up man spreading a little bit just to get the manoeuvre done. And it might look a little bit unsightly, but it works. In a nutshell, if I had a friend or family member who came to me and said, I'm thinking of doing a CBT and getting myself a 125. I do have several nephews who may get to this point, one of whom probably already has. But I would definitely advise people to get one of these YZF 125s, because for learners, they are bloody brilliant, as long as you're tall enough to fit on one, of course. They are great bikes to learn on. Now, I do love the first generation of this bike. Naturally, I have one. I'm stood right next to him right now. I'm biased, of course I'm biased, but I do prefer the nose cone on the first gen. I also actually prefer the dashboard on the first gen, because I prefer the digital speedo and analog rev counter. Second generation dashboard is nice, but I just prefer this configuration. I do love the second gen pillion pegs, but that's almost a moot point at this stage, because I plan on taking mine off anyway. So yes, I am biased about the first generation of this bike, but that said, as an owner of this bike, if I was recommending this bike to a family member, particularly my nephews who may be wanting to get into bikes in the future, I may actually suggest that they get the second gen, simply because on the first gen we didn't have ABS, but second generation onwards these bikes do have ABS. And I know you don't need ABS. You definitely don't need ABS, because I've been riding this bike for 3.5 years without ABS, and it's been absolutely fine. I've done 2 CBTs, no ABS, absolutely fine. And then I came to do my training and my test on an MT-07 that did have ABS. And on my Mod 1 training, my instructor was telling me to really hammer that front brake. When we were doing the emergency stop, she was telling me, really come around that corner once you're straightened up, really give it some, and then when you do your emergency stop, really hammer that front brake. So I did. You meant to go through the speed trap at 52 kph, and I went through at 60. And then, because she told me you'll be fine, hammer that front brake, you're not going to skid, you're not going to slip out, I really hammered that front brake, and oh my gosh, the nose dipped, the tail raised slightly, and the bike stopped so quickly. And she was right. It didn't skid, didn't slip out, didn't do any of that. It just stopped incredibly quickly. I felt like my heart and lungs didn't stop. They sort of carried on going and sort of like hit my chest. That really took my breath away, that did. But it was a great experience, because I'd never had ABS before. So particularly if we're talking about youngsters getting into bikes, they don't have a car license, they've never driven on the road. I don't want to stereotype here, but is it because they're youngsters that I feel like this, or is it because they're my nephews or even my niece or any other family members and friends? I just think for the difference in price between the first gen and the second gen, it's worth considering the second gen just for the ABS, in my opinion.
The only thing that really bugs me about this bike, I mean, yes, there's a few little things, few little niggly things, such as there's no clock, there's no gear indicator, you can't fit cotton reels on your swing arm without drilling it. You know, there's a little bit of an unfinished feel to the bike, but all of that, it's perfectly acceptable to live with that sort of stuff. You know, I can live with it clearly. I've had this bike 3.5 years. The one thing that does annoy me a little bit is the 1200 mile oil change interval. Now I've got, let's see, what have I got there? 150 miles left, because I'm on 1054. So I've got 150 miles left before I have to do another oil change. And if anybody wants to see how that's done, I'll capture that footage and post that up as a separate video. So it does annoy me a little bit, but only a little bit, because I don't commute 5 days a week on this bike. You know, this is an occasional bike, a weekend toy, you know, something for fun and games around town, and because of that I don't put a lot of miles on the bike. Oh, a little bit of man spreading again. This really is a lovely place to stop. So yes, I don't put a huge amount of miles on this bike, and because of that, that particularly low oil change interval of 1200 miles, it doesn't bother me too much. But for anyone thinking of getting one of these bikes, and if it's going to be your only method of transport, and if you're going to be commuting, it's definitely worth thinking about that. If you can do the oil change yourself, then even better. It's going to cost you a lot less. But as far as an occasional bike, you know, a weekend toy, something for riding around town on, these bikes are bloody brilliant. You can chuck them about. You can chuck them about a bit, and for the most part they will forgive you. Obviously you've got to be sensible with it, but they're quite light bikes, very easy to ride, which is why they're so great for learners. And they're amazing on fuel. So in summary, yes, I can't imagine having had anything else to learn on. I would definitely recommend them to new riders. They are sports bikes though, so you are going to be hunched over a little bit, and they're not ideal in the slightest for anyone that's in any way vertically challenged, shall we say. If you're a short chap or chapess, then these bikes aren't for you. But if you've got a little bit of height in you, and you can deal with the reasonably high seat height on them, then they are absolutely amazing machines. They are amazing machines for learning on, because ultimately that's what they are. They're a learner machine. And as I've said, I can't imagine not having this bike, at least at the minute. I would love to think that I would keep this bike. Now, I am fully prepared to sell the bike if that's the way things go, if that's how I feel, if having a bigger bike does make me fall out of love with this one. You know, it may be inevitable. This is the way things are when you're learning to ride a bike. Normally your 125 is only with you for a limited amount of time, and if that day comes, I will sell this bike. But as it stands, I would love to think that I can keep Rafiki alongside Laren, and that I can enjoy riding with both of them.